Wow, 10 years. Close, of course. Not exactly, but it has been 10 years. 2014 was when I first began work on Galaxy War 1. And now here we are at the beginning of 2024 with the complete story. So I just kind of wanted to, as a way to celebrate and to say thank you to everybody who was here along the way or who jumped in at some point, of course. I just kind of wanted to say, let's have a retrospective. Let's just look back and just discuss and reminisce and enjoy. Galaxy War 1. Wow. I had, of course, done a couple videos, if you will, of me playing with my toys, trying to make a story when I was very young. But Galaxy War 1 was my first real attempt at making a short film or at movie making. And it shows when you look at that compared to almost literally the rest of my work, you can definitely see the level of amateurness, if that's a word, amateur quality that the video had. I knew nothing about editing, so of course I had the music on a radio playing in the background behind the camera, and it was very difficult to time the music to the scene the way I wanted. And of course, that was something that I later learned about before making the later entries. Um, but yeah, it was a Memorial Day weekend 2014 when we first my sister and my brother included kind of idealized or came up with the names of Darth Oponus and Darth Negadon. And of course, it was just fun. Hey, let's what would our Sith names be? And then later in the fall, we decided to make a movie. Of course, around that time I was very into Revenge of the Sith. And you could tell if you look at our kind of behind the scenes bloopers from the first one, you could see that it was pretty much just, hey, let's have the quick setup and then let's just fight like Revenge of the Sith and play the music. And that's pretty much what we did. We just put the camera out there in one spot and it filmed us for like half hour just kind of screwing around trying to mimic Revenge of the Sith. And eventually I decided, hey, let's actually try to turn this into something. And so we shot our first three scenes. And then of course Carson, who was there helping us, had to leave for the day. But we got him back at some point in the around the end of December, and we had some time. They were down for a weekend, and we decided to create. Let's finish this. Let's idealize it. Of course, there was very. I mean, you could just tell the costumes were all over the place, right? We had the costumes of the first three scenes, and then we had several of the fight scenes where Kyle had one costume on, but then he had a different colored hoodie on in other shots because that other hoodie got thrown in the washing machine. But then we created a changing scene to kind of bridge the gap between what we shot a month before and what we ended up shooting that weekend. And for a while, the footage just kind of sat with me on my phone and on the computer. I was familiar with, not heavily familiar, but I was familiar enough with Windows DVD Maker that that's what I wanted to do. However, I came to learn that DVD Maker was no longer a thing. Um, I tried to put them in the Movie Maker, and if you've seen the very early rough cut of Galaxy War 1, or 2, as this was called at the time, it's rough. It is very rough. Of course, I still think the finished product as it is now is pretty rough, but this was a whole other level of rough. But months later, I ended up getting them edited together. Although, funny enough, there was a scene in there in which Carson's character, Darth Zanduku, was going to also be put into a life suit costume, um, so that he was also going to become another, Darth Vader-esque figure. And I don't know how it happened, but somehow that scene got deleted off of my phone, the computer, both. and it's gone to this day. And that plays into how we do things later on down the road, of course. Um, but eventually we got it edited together, and now of course at the time this was called Galaxy War 2 because the movie Conspiracy, 9-year old, even though I was actually 10, almost 11, but 9-year old Momo's fan film was called the Ultimate Galaxy War movie, and so we made this the second Galaxy War. Um, so then let's talk about Jedi Hunted. Jedi Hunted was a spring break 2015 project I attempted to make with my brother and sister just because we were bored. And this would have been kind of one of my, I tried starting making shorts with my friends at Nuclear Films, Chris Yackerson and Nick Robidoux. We tried to make a cut of Breakfast Brawl. We tried to make what ended up becoming The Adventures of Darth Momo #1. But this was an attempt to kind of further my movie making with my siblings when we had a shot. Um, so of course it's a Jedi character, right? And at the time we didn't know what this was going to be. And so there's actually a couple lines of dialogue that of course were later edited out. There's a couple lines of dialogue referring to Kyle's character as Kyle Kemlin, which I could have made work if I really wanted to, but to me, didn't make sense. So it was something that we were kind of almost just doing because we didn't know what else to call the character. Um, but the Jedi Hunter character didn't really fit into what we had with the first Galaxy War, and Grace's character just didn't feel like Oponis. So I was very hesitant to include those. But Jedi Hunted was my first attempt at actually working with shots, as you can see in Galaxy War 1. All except for one scene was shot in one take, and then that other scene was shot in two shots. So it was very much a one shot per scene, and this was my attempt at kind of experimenting with different shots and scenes, and I think it came out okay. But I remember editing or filming it, we thought it was going to be about a 2 or 3 minute short, and then I plugged it into Movie Maker, and I'm like, "Holy cow, 8 minutes!" But Jedi Hunted, while I edited it together, it kind of just sat on the cutting block for a while. As did Galaxy War 1. In fact, at this point, I'm not sure if Galaxy War 1 was even finished yet. But Jedi Hunted just kind of sat on the block because, again, my YouTube channel, while it existed, it wasn't for cinematic shorts. I didn't really know what I was going to be doing with Galaxy War other than maybe putting it on a DVD. So Jedi Hunted likewise just kind of sat, especially till I could figure out how to do what to do with the characters. So now let's talk about galactic conflict. Um, I was not very happy with how Galaxy War turned out in retrospective. Like I said, the costumes and the continuity were all over the place, especially with the lightsabers too. And there was a lot of music choices that, I mean, I was okay with the music choices, but there was no flow to it. It looked like young kids putting together a little fan film. I didn't like location wise, etc. So I decided to try and recreate it. Galaxy War was actually a name that we kind of just pulled for fun out of iCarly. That was what they called their Star Wars, was Galaxy War. So I pulled Galaxy War from that, but didn't want to keep it called that. I wanted to kind of change it to mold with our own image, to kind of step out of that shadow. And we tried to name it to Galactic Conflict. And I mean, poor Carson and Kyle, I worked them hard, very hard, on the lightsaber fights. But, we attempted to make sure that Kyle's life support system stayed with him. It wasn't just, oh, yep, you don't need it. And that only happened because we started filming without the helmet. So we then had to explain why he didn't have the helmet. Um, but that was an attempt to keep Kyle in the life support system. I don't remember if we tried to do the same with Carson or not. I'm pretty sure we did. And then obviously the locations, there was much more continuity to that. There was much more continuity to the costumes. Galactic Conflict, I would have been very proud of if we had finished it. Of course, we just we had one day to work on it, and there was a lot of work put into it, but we didn't finish it. And unfortunately, I couldn't substitute any of those scenes into the Galaxy War because the costumes wouldn't have matched for Kyle and Zanduku. Um, and for me and Grace, I could have put that in, but I only had one of those scenes done. So I couldn't put that in there either. Um, so unfortunately, Galactic Conflict just kind of once again remained on the cutting room floor. And Galactic Conflict was something where I had a different story mapped out, and I tried to map a story out with my action figures of what exactly this universe was, where I wanted to go. And I would be the first to admit I got way in over my head. We put in a lot more characters and supplies, etc., that when trying to realize on live action just wouldn't have happened. Um, but I never, that day when we stopped filming, I didn't intend to give up on Galactic Conflict. Unfortunately, it kind of happened. And Galactic Conflict just kind of hung around for a while. And that would have, I believe, was maybe spring, summer of 2015. So then, towards the fall in 2015, we were up in Prescott. It was our turn to go visit Carson and Charlie. And Carson was very excited to make a Galaxy War, a three or another one. We were still calling them two and three at the time. So we decided, what the heck, let's do it. But this provided for some interesting opportunity because since we had lost the scene with Carson being placed in a life support character or life support system for his character, we didn't need that anymore. He could just appear as is. And so we ran with that and we created our whole lightsaber fight. We decided to up the stakes. We killed off Master Palmer. We killed off um, Carson's character Zanduku, and which of course was not my original plan for Galaxy War timeline, the story. This was very different. It was still kind of workable into that timeline. Um, but this was definitely a different step. We evolved the plot, hence the name Evolutions. But when we went to review the footage, I realized we only had about 10 minutes of footage. And I'm like, wait a second. The other one was about 20 minutes long. No, no, no. We need something more. So the whole plot with the bounty hunter was kind of formed out of whole cloth, really just to pad the runtime. But I thought there was some interesting story being told there. Of course, we're furthering Kyle's character. He's lost. He doesn't know what to do. And we keep referencing Trinipla. We hadn't brought her into the plot yet. Um, but we definitely, I was proud of Evolutions and how it turned out. Um, I thought that there was definitely a step up in production quality. There was a step up in story. This wasn't just us trying to mimic Revenge of the Sith. This was us trying to tell our own story. And I think out of the three that came to be, this was probably the most original. I was proud of myself in editing because this was the first time I undertook such a big project. By this point, I had had um, a couple more smaller projects with my siblings under my belt, but this was the first like big project I seriously tried to work and exercise some editing skills on. And I was very proud of how it turned out. I remember showing it to Chris Yackerson one morning and he was impressed. And I showed it to Nick Robidoux. At first he was very cynical, but he ended up by the end of it, he was on board. He was proud of it. Or he liked it. And then a couple months later, I still planned kind of my original timeline for and story for Galaxy War. I kind of molded it around Evolutions to fit that and keep it more or less the same. And I'd also tried to work on a way to incorporate the story of the movie Conspiracy into the timeline of Galaxy War 2 and 3. And I began working with Chris Yackerson on maybe trying to remake the Galaxy War with a different cast, in association with Nuclear Films to, um, put better production quality spin on it, as well as a more formed story, something that wasn't just a straight remake of Revenge of the Sith in our own image, of course. But then around December, Christmas break, after The Force Awakens had came out, Carson was in town again, and the thought came up of making another Galaxy War. And so I decided, you know what? yeah, let's do it. And so we shot the opening scenes with the bounty hunter blood streak, which was our way of including Carson in there. And then decided to start forming the story and decided, all right, we've had two installments referencing her. Let's finally bring in Trinipla. And we cast Grace's friend Allie to play Trinipla. And I kind of wrote the story around almost like this was four, right? And we had one, two, and three. So I almost formed it like this was the beginning of a new trilogy. Now this is kind of the passing of the torch. This was no longer going to be focused on Kyle Kemlin. This was now going to be focused on Trinipla. And I had envisioned two more installments. So we put Galaxy War together, or the fourth one together, and I thought it came out okay. It was again, working with several different shots, and I thought it was a bit heavier in terms of story, in terms of scenes. There was a lot more shots than there was in Galaxy War. Three in Evolutions, Evolutions was still very much a mix of shots and um, one-shot scenes, whereas this was full in on that. And for a 20-minute film, that was a lot to undertake. Um, but it was at this point when I was editing Galaxy War, I decided, you know what, let's revamp this. Let's kind of make our own special editions. There was a lot of things still I was unhappy about with Galaxy War and Enemies Redemption that I continued to tinker with, and there was a lot that I didn't like about kind of the way we formed it. It was a very basic crawl. It was, and I think at this point the crawl may have still been an audio crawl in Enemies Redemption, and then it was white and black text. And I decided, no, let's turn it into let's revamp it into a Star Wars esque fan film. Let's actually get it some of the proper characteristics. So I completely revamped the credits on it to make it look like Star Wars. I revamped the crawl, and I decided, you know what? Let's quit trying to mix this story I made with action figures when I was 10. Let's quit trying to mix that with this. This is its own thing. So let's rename them. And at this point, Galaxy War 2 was renamed to Galaxy War 1. Galaxy War 3 was renamed to Galaxy War 2. And then an Powerful Fear, the Galaxy War 4, was named to Galaxy War 3. And then that was it. That was my trilogy. We had set off on a cliffhanger with Lord Palmer being named Trinipla. And this was interesting too, because in Galaxy War Evolutions, it was a way to just kind of have some fun with our audience, Kyle, Carson, and whoever else would see it on. Oh shoot, is that Palmer? And by introducing Lord Palmer into Evolutions, we really changed the story. And that completely reformed how a Powerful Fear was going to turn out. That turned out nothing like I had originally envisioned for Galaxy War. Originally, actually, Oponus was going to be Trinipla's mother, but I'm a much bigger fan of how this one turned out. And introducing Lord Palmer was a very interesting mix into the story. And so at this point, I began to work on the rest of them. So Galaxy War 4, um, now, or this was called Cloud of Darkness. I wrote out a script, and then I got our cast together for a table read. We began a couple scene or work on a couple scenes, and this is going to be a fun one for me because we were going to bring back Zanduk. We were almost going to kind of bring it full circle. We were going to kill off Kyle Kemlin and bring in Zanduku. And unfortunately, it just never came to be. It was difficult to coordinate scheduling for Zanduku's character or actor Carson and Ali, who played Trinipla, to coordinate that. It would have been easy for one shot, and there was some plans in the works to get it going, but it just never ended up panning out. And it's unfortunate because I thought it would have been a really good game changer. And the story was there. Um, and then Galaxy War 4, I had shot a table read for. So, not wanting anything to go unfinished, I worked with my table read as well as the scenes we had shot to kind of come up with a rough cut version of Galaxy War 4. Of course, I knew that was going to be super confusing to just drop like that. So, a year later, when it went on YouTube, I created a brief Galaxy War 4 documentary titled What Happened, and kind of briefly explain the scenario, what was going on, and why things turned out the way they did. So that's where we're at with Galaxy War 4. Of course, it had been left that way for years until I later began work on Galaxy War 5, that I went back and recorded the script for Galaxy War 4, and I released that as a narrated audio script. So that way, at least, the story could be out there. Now, allow me to backpedal just a little. Around the same time as pre production on Galaxy War 4, Cloud of Darkness, we were able to kind of make another project, The Power of Lord Palmer. Power of Lord Palmer essentially just started out as it was unplanned. It was just me screwing around with Kyle and his buddy Hunter in the back, just playing lightsabers. And we kind of created our own little story. And I decided, you know what? Or we all mutually kind of decided, hey, that was cool. Let's film that. And we went back and did it again with the camera and we filmed it. And at this point, things kind of started to fall into place as to Jedi Hunted. I decided, hey, let's make this about Lord Palmer, who we had just introduced in Galaxy War 2 and 3. Let's make this about his character, kind of before the fall of the Jedi Order and before the Galaxy War series. He's just out killing a couple of Jedi. And then I decided, you know what? Let's make this the same for Kyle, his character. Let's make it the same character as from Jedi Hunted. And then that kind of just fell into place too. Then this was his Padawan with Hunter, and then as we will see a little bit later in the timeline, the evil girl is who Grace's character became, and I ended up using her in the Momo prequels that I filmed a little bit later that year. So that kind of helped put Jedi Hunted into place. I do also want to mention, let's talk about Tales from the Machine of the Past. So Tales from the Machine of the Past was something that I was assigned for as a school project to kind of assign human characteristics to non-human objects. And I decided, you know what, this would be my opportunity to kind of do justice by Rudolph and Quack because the 2013 attempt never really panned out. And then obviously we know how the 2009 attempt goes and how that exists. But then I decided to skip to the Galaxy War chunk of it. I decided to throw in a little bit of connection and connective tissue to the Galaxy War timeline by introducing Luke Skywalker as well as Master Palmer, Miles Kafani, and Muscle Man. Um, and this was kind of to help set the stage for what would eventually become in the timeline the Galaxy War saga. So we also had Darth Baka and his apprentice Darth Wu is briefly tapped or touched upon, and Darth Wu is who I had envisioned as the master for Darth Oponus. So just a little bit of connective tissue, but enough to kind of set some stakes. But that was also the first real attempt at implementing on screen the connective tissue to the Star Wars trilogy and what kind of came before. Of course, with the dialogue references that were put into Galaxy War 4, but that was, of course, never put on screen. Now let's talk about Standoff in the Desert. So, Standoff in the Desert was just kind of, again, this was a year later. Galaxy War had been pretty much dormant by this time. Um, excuse me. So, I was just screwing around at the library when we were there one day. I had my supplies and I just filmed me on a green screen playing two different characters. And then I decided, you know what? Let's make this Master Palmer from Galaxy War. This is after the fall of the Jedi, and he's out surviving on a desert planet, and a bounty hunter comes after him because the Empire knows he survived. Oponus knows he's out and about. Kyle knows he's out and about. So let's just make it about him. It was short, it was quick, but I created a whole little story around it with the crawl, and yeah, it was fun. So now Galaxy War kind of laid dormant, and it lay dormant for a while. Got to dabble a little bit with it in the Momo Adventures line, but this was more or less the end of Galaxy War. But I wanted to at least kind of touch on what the final installment would have been. So I made a documentary called Galaxy War 5, The Early Stages and What Exists. And there was a lot of ideas that I threw around in there that I had wanted to do. You know, I had wanted to play around with the Empress's bodyguard. We were going to give Robo Sapien a larger role. Of course, it was going to be the final end of the story. Zanduku was going to be back in full force. And then that was it. And it laid like that for years. And finally, earlier in 2023, I decided to kind of have a YouTube renaissance and get back into YouTube a little bit. And then I started thinking about how 2024 was going to be 15 years of Jaw movies. And I'd kind of decided to do a little oral history video. And as I was typing the script for that, I realized, we never really got to finish Galaxy War 5. Wouldn't that be nice if I could at least get a script out there? And so I decided to put together a script. And so I wrote Galaxy War 5. I reviewed, 1 through 3 pretty fresh in my mind, pretty they live there rent free. I made those there intimately things I'm familiar with. I reviewed the script for Galaxy War 4 and I set out from there. I did not review the documentary. I kind of had a own idea of where I wanted to take Galaxy War 5. I kind of wanted the moral of the story. If we're going to look at Return of the Jedi being, hey, winning with love, I thought I'd kind of make an inverse of that for Galaxy War 5, how the dark side consumes itself. The dark side cannot win like the light side can because there's no teamwork, there's no compassion. It's selfish in its nature. It's a perversion of nature. It is not the true force. The force is the light side. So I decided to play around with that idea. Um, but I knew that there was a lot of things that needed to be explained. We can't just bring Zanduku back without explaining how he's back. I knew there was still a lot of backstory that hadn't really been mentioned or talked about on screen. We kind of had the before the inciting event with the spin-offs and the Momo adventures. And then we kind of had the Galaxy War series, which was afterwards, but we never really explained what happened, what led to Kyle becoming Darth Negadon, how the Jedi Order was destroyed, the specifics. So I made sure to include a lot of details explaining all that. And then I wrote the script out. I again did a recorded audio narration of it, and I put that together. And now the story is complete. Again, I don't ever think we'll finish it, which is unfortunate, but at least now the full story is out there. I've told the full story of Galaxy War. Galaxy War 1 and Enemy's Redemption, Galaxy War 2 Evolutions, Galaxy War 3 A Powerful Figure, Galaxy War 4 Cloud of Darkness, and Galaxy War 5 Fight for the Force. I'm happy with the story. I'm very pleased how it ended, and I thought it was due. I finished my projects that I wanted to do with the Momos. We finally got Momo 15 done. I finished My Lego Clone War to tell that prequel story to My Lego Rebel Life. But this one hung over my head for years. And at least now it's somewhat finished. And with that, I'm pleased. I'm satisfied. I've told the story, and now the story will live on. So here we are 10 years later after the creation of Galaxy War, and I couldn't be, well, it would have been nice to finish it, but under the circumstances, I couldn't be happier. So I just wanted to say thank you for being part of the Galaxy War experience. Thank you for following us along over the years, and I'm glad that you guys could be here for the end of the story. So thank you very much for joining in.